Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. I remember the day we decided to venture into the forbidden forest like it was yesterday. Tom, Sarah, and I, Jake, had always been inseparable, united by our love for adventure. We grew up in a small town, nestled against the edge of vast forests and rugged hills, where every tree and stream felt like part of our childhood. But there was one place no one ever dared to explore: the Forbidden Forest. The stories about it were always told in hushed tones. Local legends about spirits trapped within the trees, about travelers who ventured in and never returned. We were never ones to shy away from a challenge. When Tom suggested we hike into that forest, I was the first to agree. Sarah hesitated, of course. She always did, always the voice of reason among us. But Tom and I, well, we were a little more reckless, a little more eager to face what others feared. As we stood at the edge of the woods, the air felt heavy, like the forest was watching us. The trees loomed tall and dark, their branches twisting up into the sky like skeletal fingers. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ground, and everything around us seemed to breathe in time with the wind. Tom grinned, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "All right, what are we waiting for? Let's make this a hike to remember." Sarah pulled her jacket tighter around herself, casting a nervous glance at the trees. "I don't know about this, Tom. Something feels off." I could see the unease in her eyes, but I wasn't about to let it stop us. "It's just a forest, Sarah. We've seen worse." But as I said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this place was different. There was a stillness in the air, a quiet that wasn't natural. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to take the first step. And when we did, when we stepped beyond that line and into the darkening woods, everything changed. The sounds of the outside world, cars, people, the bustle of life, faded away. All that remained was the whispering of the wind through the leaves, the soft crunch of our boots against the damp earth. At first, it was easy. We walked deeper into the forest, the path narrow but clear, the trees lining up on either side like sentinels, keeping watch over our every move. But the further we went, the quieter it became. The world outside seemed to slip away, and all that was left was the oppressive silence of the forest. "Did you hear that?" Tom's voice cut through the stillness, his words filled with unease. I stopped and turned, trying to catch my breath. "What?" "I swear I heard someone. Call my name," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. From behind us. It was like someone said, "Tom." I laughed it off, but even I couldn't shake the cold shiver that crawled down my spine. I had heard it too. A voice, faint and distant, like it was carried on the wind. But I wasn't about to let it spook me. "It's just the wind, man," I said, trying to sound confident. But Sarah wasn't so sure. Her eyes flickered nervously, scanning the darkening forest. "I heard it too, Jake. It sounded like it came from back there." We all stood in silence, listening, but all we could hear was the rustle of leaves in the wind. The trees above creaked, their branches groaning like they were stretching out of some deep, forgotten slumber. And then, just as we were about to move forward, we heard it again. "Tom." It was faint, but unmistakable. The voice was no longer distant. It was close. Too close. My heart began to race. I wasn't sure what it was, but it wasn't the wind. It was something else, something darker. I could feel it in my bones. "Okay, let's just keep moving," I said, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. We're probably just imagining things, but the further we went, the more the whispers seemed to follow. The wind picked up again, but this time it felt like it had a mind of its own, like it was guiding us, pulling us deeper into the heart of the forest. And then we saw it. The trees ahead of us seemed to move. No, not move. They shifted. The branches bent and twisted in unnatural angles, blocking our path, as if the forest itself was rearranging itself around us. We couldn't go back. The way we had come was gone. "We're trapped," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with fear. I felt it too. There was no way out. The forest had closed in around us, and the more we struggled to move, the tighter the trees seemed to press in. And then, just as the panic began to set in, we heard it again. A scream, a piercing, desperate cry that seemed to echo from the depths of the forest. My stomach turned. I knew what it was. "Jake!" Sarah screamed, her voice breaking. "Where's Jake?" I turned around, and my heart stopped. Jake was gone. Vanished. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. I heard his voice, faint and distorted, joining the whispers. His voice now one with the chorus of the lost souls. "Jake!" I shouted, my voice hoarse. But there was no answer, only the growing murmurs of the spirits that seemed to be calling us, beckoning us closer. Sarah and I were alone now. The whispers grew louder, the voices twisting and contorting until they were no longer recognizable. But we heard them. We heard our names, spoken with an eerie familiarity. The forest was alive, and it wanted us. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, someone, a figure, standing in the shadows. It was Sarah, but it wasn't her. Her eyes were wide, glazed over, her movements stiff and unnatural. "Sarah, no!" I shouted, reaching for her, but she was already being pulled away, her body jerking as though some unseen force was dragging her into the darkness. Her scream mixed with the whispers, joining the voices of the lost. I was alone now. The forest had claimed them, just like it had claimed so many others before. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest, but the forest wouldn't let me go. It had already decided my fate. The whispers were still there, all around me. And just as I thought I'd reached the edge, just as I thought I'd escaped, I looked down at my shadow, and I saw it move, stretch, twist unnaturally, as if it had a life of its own. And in that moment I knew. The forest had claimed me too. I wasn't alone, not anymore. I'll never forget that day, the day we crossed into the forbidden forest. Tom, Sarah, and I had always been drawn to the unknown, driven by the thrill of what lay just beyond the horizon. But this was different. There was something about this forest, something that felt wrong even before we stepped inside. It was like the whole world outside had slipped away, and we were being pulled into something we couldn't escape from. We stood at the edge of the forest, looking into its depths. The trees were massive, tall, twisted, and ancient, like they had seen centuries pass. The sunlight was beginning to fade, casting long, eerie shadows on the ground. The air was thick, heavy with an almost palpable silence. Even the birds, usually so eager to fill the air with their calls, seemed to have fallen mute. It was as though the forest itself was waiting for us. Tom, always the bold one, slapped me on the back with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You ready for this, Jake? Let's make this an adventure to remember." I nodded, though a cold shiver ran down my spine. There was something unsettling about this place, something that made every instinct in me scream to turn back. But I didn't. We never did. Sarah, the more cautious of the group, stood a little farther back, her eyes scanning the trees with suspicion. "Are we sure about this?" she asked, voice tight with doubt. "This place doesn't feel right." Her words hung in the air, and for a brief moment I wondered if maybe she was right. The forest felt off. But Tom was already stepping forward, leading us into the thickening shadows, his energy contagious. "Don't be ridiculous, Sarah," he said with that familiar grin. "It's just a forest. What's the worst that could happen?" With that, we followed him, moving deeper into the woods. At first, it felt like any hike, peaceful, quiet, and full of the usual forest sounds, leaves rustling in the wind, the occasional crack of a branch underfoot. But that only lasted for so long. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. The sounds faded. The trees, massive and looming, seemed to press in on us, their branches like long, outstretched arms. And with every step, the air grew heavier, more suffocating. The further we went, the more I felt the weight of it, like something was pressing on my chest. I glanced back at Sarah, who seemed even more uncomfortable than before. Her face was pale, her eyes darting around as if she expected something to leap out from the shadows. "Tom, I think we should turn back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to look at her, trying to reassure her. "It's just a forest, Sarah. We've been on hikes before. There's nothing to worry about." But I wasn't so sure myself. Something about this place. It felt like it was alive, like the trees were watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake, and then it happened. We had been walking in silence for what felt like hours, the only sound being the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. That's when I heard it. Soft at first, almost imperceptible. A whisper. I thought maybe it was just the wind, but it was too deliberate, too clear. "Tom." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I could have sworn I heard something, call my name, and it wasn't the wind. I turned to Sarah and Jake, my voice tight as I asked, "Did you hear that?" Sarah looked at me with wide eyes. "What?" I swear someone just called my name. Jake, ever the skeptic, gave me a nervous laugh. "It's just the wind, man. You're hearing things." But I wasn't so sure. I felt a cold chill creep up my spine as I scanned the darkening forest around us. There was no one there. No one but the trees, their shadows stretching long across the ground. But the voice, it had been clear, real. We kept walking, but the atmosphere was different now. The air felt thick, pressing in on us from all sides, and the wind was no longer gentle. It howled through the trees, but even that sound seemed distorted, like it was carrying someone else's voice. And then it happened again. This time, clearer, more distinct. "Tom." I froze again, my blood running cold. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I spun around to look at Sarah and Jake, but neither of them had heard it. They were still walking, still moving forward, completely oblivious. My breath came in shallow gasps as I struggled to comprehend what was happening. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. There was something else in this forest, something that was watching us, something that was aware of us. "Sarah, Jake," I called out, my voice rising in panic. "Didn't you hear that?" They both stopped and looked at me, their faces confused. "Hear what?" Jake asked. "That voice," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone's calling my name. It's coming from the trees." But Sarah, ever the skeptic, just shook her head. "Jake's right. It's just the wind. We're fine, okay?" But as I stood there, staring at her, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't fine, that something was very wrong. Suddenly, I noticed the trees, They weren't just trees, they were wrong. Their bark twisted in unnatural patterns, their branches curving and reaching out like gnarled hands, grabbing at the air as if trying to pull us in. The path had started to change too. What had once been a narrow but clear trail was now blocked by thick underbrush, the trees now twisting in impossible angles to form a wall of shadows. It felt like the forest itself was moving, shifting around us. I felt a surge of panic. We need to leave, now. But the forest wouldn't let us. The trees seemed to close in behind us, blocking the way we came. The only path forward was a dark maze of twisted branches and thick, tangled roots. There was no turning back. That's when I heard it again. A voice, Sarah's voice, clear as day, calling from the shadows. "Sarah." I turned to her, my face ashen. Her eyes were wide with fear. What the hell is happening? Before I could answer, there was a rustling noise behind us, and I turned just in time to see Sarah's figure being yanked into the dark, her body jerking unnaturally as if pulled by invisible hands. Her scream echoed through the trees, her voice now a part of the whispering chorus that surrounded us. I tried to reach for her, but she was gone, swallowed by the forest, her form fading into the blackness. I stood there, frozen, heart racing in my chest, the whispers now surrounding me, calling to me, beckoning me into the depths of the woods. The air was thick with dread, every breath feeling like it would be my last. I was alone now. The forest had claimed her, and it was coming for me next. It was supposed to be just another hike, a bit of an adventure, a walk in the woods, something to break the monotony. But when we stepped into that forest, it felt like stepping into another world. Tom, Sarah, and I had been through countless hikes together, always looking for the next challenge, the next place to explore. But this time was different. The moment we crossed into the boundary of the forest, something shifted. The air grew colder, thicker, as if the very atmosphere around us was pressing down on our shoulders. It was as though the trees themselves were watching, waiting. The usual sounds of the forest, the birds chirping, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush, had fallen silent. There was nothing but the sound of our footsteps crunching on the forest floor, and the whispers. They began, barely audible at first, like a murmur in the distance. Tom, always the bold one, seemed to brush it off. "It's just the wind," he said, grinning that ever-confident grin of his. But I wasn't so sure. It was something in the air, something oppressive, as though we had crossed into a place where the rules didn't quite apply. We continued deeper, the path winding through the trees, but the further we went, the more the air seemed to close in around us. The trees were taller here, their branches twisting and gnarled like old hands reaching out for us. The wind had picked up, but it wasn't a normal breeze. It was more like a low, almost mournful hum. I glanced at Sarah, who was walking a little behind us. Her face was pale, her eyes darting around the shadows like she was afraid of something we couldn't see. "I don't know about this, guys," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it doesn't feel right." Of course, Tom brushed it off. "You're just spooked. It's just a forest. What's the worst that could happen?" But I could feel it too, the weight in the air, the quiet that seemed too heavy, too thick. Something was off. But still we kept moving forward, all three of us trying to ignore the sense of unease that gnawed at our insides. And then it happened. As we continued down the narrow path, the whispers grew louder, and then I heard it, my name. It was faint at first, just a soft breath in the air, but unmistakable. Tom. My heart skipped a beat, my breath caught in my chest. Had I heard that? No, it had to be the wind. I was imagining things. But then it came again, louder this time, clear as day. "Tom." I stopped dead in my tracks. My head snapped around, scanning the trees, searching the shadows. But there was nothing. Nothing but the dark, gnarled trunks of the trees, the shifting branches overhead. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't just a sound. Something was calling my name. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely more than a rasp. Sarah's face was pale, her eyes wide. I heard it too," she whispered, clutching at my arm. "It wasn't the wind, it was someone called your name." I turned to Jake, my heart pounding in my chest. He just shrugged, trying to laugh it off. "It's just the wind, guys. You're both freaking yourselves out." But I wasn't so sure. Something about this place, this forest, it wasn't right. It felt like it was alive, like the trees themselves were watching us, waiting. We kept walking, but the air was growing thicker, heavier. The whispers were louder now, more insistent. And then I heard it again. Sarah. It wasn't just the wind, it wasn't just the trees. It was her name, clear as if someone were standing right behind us. My heart raced, my chest tightening as I spun around, searching for the source. But there was nothing. Nothing but the shadows, and the thick, oppressive silence that had begun to press in on us. "Sarah!" the voice called again. But it wasn't just her name anymore, it was becoming twisted, distorted. A voice that didn't belong. I grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her closer. "We need to go," I said, my voice urgent. "Now." But before I could say anything else, the forest shifted. The trees, they moved. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in the branches. But then the underbrush closed in behind us, blocking the way we had come. The path that had been there, clear and open, was gone. The trees had moved, reshaping themselves in ways that defied logic. We were trapped. No matter how hard we tried to move forward or backward, we couldn't. The forest had closed in around us, and there was no way out. And then it happened. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. The voices were no longer just voices, they were calling us. And that's when I saw it. Jake. But it wasn't Jake, not really. He was standing a few feet away, his body jerking unnaturally. His face was twisted in agony, his eyes wide, unblinking, his mouth moving but not in a way that made sense. His voice was different. It wasn't him, it was hollow, distant, distorted. His lips moved, but it was as if he was speaking someone else's words. "Run," he gasped, the sound coming from his throat in a strangled whisper. But it wasn't his voice. It was something else, something wrong. Before I could react, the ground beneath him seemed to shift. His body was pulled backward, jerked violently as though some invisible force had a hold of him. His feet left the ground, and for a split second he hovered in midair, his body twitching and writhing like it was being controlled by something beyond his will. His eyes locked onto mine, filled with terror. "Jake!" I shouted, reaching for him, but it was no use. He was gone. The forest swallowed him whole, just like that. His scream, his voice. It was swallowed by the wind, absorbed into the chorus of whispers that now surrounded me. His figure disappeared into the shadows, lost to the darkness. And all I could do was stand there, frozen, my breath caught in my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. It felt like the earth had opened up beneath me and I was falling into an abyss of terror. But then it got worse. I could still hear him, his voice, distorted, now mixed with the whispers, calling my name. His voice, was no longer his own. It was a part of the forest now, a part of whatever it was that had taken him. And the worst part was this. The voice, his voice, was calling for me. I turned to look around, trying to find a way out, but the trees had closed in, the path was gone, and the whispers, they were louder than ever, now calling both of us by name, beckoning us into the darkness. And I realized one horrible truth. I was alone now. The forest had taken Sarah, it had taken Jake, and I was next. I don't know how to explain it, I really don't. What was supposed to be just a hike, a simple escape into the woods to break the monotony, became something far darker, something that I can't even begin to fully comprehend. We were friends, Tom, Sarah, and I, Jake. We were always ready to face whatever came our way, but this place, this forest, it changed everything. At first, it seemed normal enough. The trees were old, twisted, their branches stretching out like knotted fingers. The air felt thick with a strange chill, but we brushed it off. The further we went into the forest, the more it started to feel different, like we were being watched, like the trees were alive. But we kept laughing it off, until we heard the whispers. At first, it was faint. Just the wind, right? Just the forest doing its thing. But then I heard it. My name. Tom. That voice, soft, chilling, had no place in the wind. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked at Sarah and Jake, but they didn't seem to hear it. I could feel the air shift, the weight of something else pressing down on me. But they were still laughing, still moving forward, oblivious to what I had just felt. The trees began to change, though. The path we had been following became harder to see. It twisted, like the forest itself was rearranging around us. We turned around, but the way we came from, our escape route, was blocked by thick, tangled undergrowth. The path was gone, we were trapped. And that's when it happened. Sarah, my friend. She was standing a few feet away, eyes wide, staring into the shadows. I could see the terror in her face, the way her body was stiff, like something was pulling her in, drawing her toward the heart of the darkness. I reached out for her, my voice tight with panic, but she didn't respond. She was lost in whatever had taken hold of her. "Sarah," I called out, my voice breaking. "Come on, we have to go, now." But she didn't move. Her body seemed paralyzed, her eyes locked on something I couldn't see. I grabbed her by the shoulders, trying to pull her away, but there was a force in the air now, something I couldn't explain. The whispers had grown louder, more urgent, and Sarah, she wasn't Sarah anymore. Her lips parted, and the voice that came out wasn't hers. "Sarah," she whispered, but it was too slow, too deliberate. The voice, it wasn't her voice. It was something darker, something wrong. "Sarah, no!" I screamed, shaking her, but she didn't respond. Her eyes, wide with terror, looked right through me as if I weren't even there. And then, I heard it again. The voice, soft and twisted, calling her name. "Sarah." The trees began to groan, their branches swaying in unnatural ways. The wind picked up, howling now, as though the forest itself was alive, screaming with the wind, with the trees, with the very air. I could feel it pressing in on us, suffocating us. And then it happened, the shift. I don't know how else to describe it. The ground trembled beneath us and the air turned icy. The whispering had become a deafening roar, and in the midst of it all, Sarah's body jerked violently. I didn't know what to do. My mind screamed at me to run, to escape, but Sarah, she was right there, caught in whatever dark force had ensnared her. I reached for her again, but as my hand touched her shoulder, the impossible happened. She was pulled. Her body lurched backward, yanked from my grasp with unnatural strength. Her legs buckled, but her body lifted off the ground, her feet leaving the earth as though the forest itself had decided she was no longer welcome. Her eyes, her terrified eyes, locked on mine for one fleeting moment, and then she was gone. Gone. just like that. Her scream was swallowed by the wind as the shadows closed around her, as the trees twisted in ways that defied nature, and the whispers, oh God, the whispers, they filled the space where she had been, echoing with her name, drawing her into the darkness. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't stop it. I just stood there, frozen, my mind unable to process what I had just witnessed. The forest had taken her. I was alone. The whispers, they became louder now, calling her name, pulling her voice into the chorus of the lost, but she wasn't there anymore. There was no trace of Sarah, just the black void of the forest, consuming everything in its wake. And I could feel it. The darkness wasn't done. It was coming for me next. I took a step back, my body shaking, my breath quickening. But I couldn't move. The trees were closing in, their branches clawing toward me, and the ground beneath my feet was shifting, pulling me toward the same fate. I wasn't just trapped by the forest, I was being drawn in. I turned, but the path was gone. The trees had closed behind me, and ahead there was nothing but more shadows, more whispers. The forest had taken Sarah, just like it had taken the others. And now, I was next. The whispers grew louder still, and through them I heard something, someone, calling my name. Tom. And I knew with a sickening certainty that I was never going to leave this place. The forest had claimed her. It had claimed Jake. And now it was coming for me. I don't know how to explain it. It was supposed to be just another hike, a simple escape from the chaos of everyday life. Tom, Sarah, and I, Jake, we'd done this 1,000 times before. Just the three of us, hitting the trails, laughing, joking around. But this forest, this place was different. From the moment we stepped in, I could feel something was wrong. It was like the world beyond the trees had disappeared, swallowed by the shadows. The air was thick, heavy, like it was holding its breath. The trees loomed over us, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out and pull at the sky. The wind carried with it a whispering sound, soft at first, but unmistakable. Whispers that felt too deliberate to be natural. At first, I tried to ignore it. Just the wind, right? But then it happened. Tom. That voice. It was unmistakable. My name carried on the breeze. But it wasn't just the wind. It was something else. Something watching us, waiting for us to realize it. I stopped in my tracks, heart pounding in my chest. My eyes scanned the trees around me. There was no one there. No one except Sarah and Jake, who were still a few steps behind, blissfully unaware of the sensation that was crawling up my spine. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Sarah gave me a confused look. "Hear what?" "It called my name," I said, my words feeling strange as they left my mouth. "I swear it came from over there." Jake laughed, shaking his head. "You're just hearing things, man. It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. My chest felt tight, like I was suffocating, and the whispering, oh, it had become louder now. It wasn't the wind anymore. It was voices, soft, faint, but definitely calling to us. I could hear it again, clearer this time. "Tom." I turned to Sarah and Jake. "Did you hear that?" But their faces were pale now, their eyes wide with the same unease I felt creeping into my bones. "Sarah." The voice came again, but this time it wasn't mine. It was hers. Her name was drawn out like a sigh, carried on the wind from deep within the forest. My heart slammed into my ribcage as I looked at Sarah, who had frozen in place, her eyes locked onto something in the distance. "Sarah?" I asked, my voice frantic. "What is it?" She didn't answer. Her body was stiff, her eyes unfocused, like she wasn't even seeing me anymore. She was staring at the shadows between the trees, her lips trembling but silent. My gut twisted as I took a step toward her. "Sarah!" I shouted, but she still didn't respond. It wasn't just the wind. It wasn't just in our heads. There was something in this place, something alive, and it was drawing her in. I reached for her, my fingers grazing her shoulder, trying to snap her out of whatever trance she was in. That's when I saw it. The trees. They were shifting. The branches swayed, not from the wind, but from something more deliberate. The shadows seemed to stretch out, reaching for us, pulling us deeper into the forest. And then, from behind me, the worst sound I'd ever heard. A scream, Sarah's scream. I spun around, just in time to see her being yanked backward, as if something invisible had grabbed her. Her body jerked violently, her limbs thrashing as she was pulled into the darkness. I reached out, my hand grasping for her, but she was gone, swallowed by the shadows. Her scream was swallowed by the wind, leaving only silence behind. I stood there, frozen, my body numb with fear. My mind couldn't comprehend what had just happened. It was impossible. But there she was, gone, just like that. The forest had taken her. I couldn't stay, I couldn't. I turned and ran, panic surging through my veins, but the forest was changing around me. The trees were closing in, their branches twisting and reshaping to block my path. The whispers, oh God, the whispers had become a cacophony now, a chorus of voices that all seemed to call my name. Jake. I stumbled forward, the ground beneath me shifting, roots tangling around my feet, trying to pull me down. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let it take me too. I was almost there, almost free. The edge of the forest, the dim light of the dying day. I could see it ahead, just beyond the trees. But then, the air changed again. "Tom." The voice came again. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was clear. It was sharp. It was Sarah's voice, but it wasn't her. It was distorted, stretched like it was coming from a deep, dark place. Like the forest itself had claimed her, and was now using her voice to draw me back. I forced my legs to move. I had to get out. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't give in. But then, something caught my eye, my shadow. I had stepped out of the trees and into the clearing, but my shadow, it moved. It wasn't like any shadow I'd ever seen. It stretched unnaturally, crawling along the ground, twisting like it had a life of its own. I froze, my stomach dropping. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I looked around, the light from the sun barely breaking through the trees, and realized with a sickening certainty that I hadn't escaped. I was still in it. The shadow moved again, pulling me forward, dragging me back toward the forest. It was no longer just a reflection of my movements. It was something else. It was alive. "No," I gasped, my voice trembling with fear. "I'm not going back." But the shadow didn't care. It pulled at me, harder now, dragging me toward the darkness. I tried to fight, tried to move, but it was useless. The forest had already claimed me. I heard it again, Sarah's voice, but now it wasn't a whisper, it was a command. "Come back." I turned to look, but the darkness had already enveloped me. The trees had closed in, and the path I thought I'd escaped was gone. The wind howled, louder than before, and I could feel the earth shifting beneath my feet. It wasn't real anymore. Nothing felt real. The whispers were all around me, filling my mind, suffocating me. And then I realized it had never been about escaping. The forest had never let me go. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.